boundaries are for other people. It doesn't apply to me. Like, if you don't think you can do something, then don't do it. And that's fine. And no one's going to judge you for it. I'll know when I'm not capable of something. That's the great thing about racing. It is a meritocracy. At the end of the day, you're either on pole or you're not. You're either winning races or you're not. There's no age to it.
That was Robb Holland. Robb is a professional race car driver, an automotive journalist, and TV personality who has competed in and held records in the British Touring Car Championship, Pikes Peak, and the World Touring Car Championships. Robb is a former collegiate cycling champion who grew up racing with Lance Armstrong, Greg LeMond, and George Hincapie. In last year's Nashville Grand Prix, which takes place throughout the streets of Music City, Robb won the GT4 Series competition. Let's learn about the similarities between cycling and auto racing, and how the drive for competition delivers results in all aspects of Robb's life.
I'm Sally Hussey, the CEO of 50 Forward, and we're glad you joined us to hear inspiring stories from older adults. Their words of wisdom are well worth sharing as we seek to navigate a meaningful and purpose-driven second chapter in our life. This podcast is made possible through the work of 50 Forward and our mission to support, champion, and enhance the lives of those 50 and older.
Today's Squeeze the Day is brought to you by the All of Us Research Program from the National Institutes of Health. Learn how you can help change the future of health by participating in the program. Visit www.joinallofus.org to learn more. I'm Susan Sizemore, Communications Director of 50 Forward. So let's get started. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's so exciting to see you in person again. I know we met during the Grand Prix when you were in Nashville a year ago, and I really wanted to talk to you a little bit about your racing background and motorsports in general so people can get maybe a little bit inside the business, inside the cockpit of a race car with you, and then really get inside the sport itself through the eyes of an athlete. So being a racing professional since 2005, you are also a licensed FIA international driver. What does that mean to the racing novice?
The FIA international license is probably one of the top licenses you can get as a sports car driver. You have got to go through a bunch of stuff on the national level to actually be able to qualify to get an international license. And that license has allowed me to compete all over the world in pretty much every event that you'd want to compete in. I lived for a number of years at the Nürburgring in Germany, so I've done a number of races, the overall annual series, and then also the 24 hours of Nürburgring. I've raced at Bathurst, I've raced at Spa, all these places that you dream of racing, when you start the sport, I've been able to do with an FIA international license.
So how long does it take to get a license like that?
Honestly, it just depends. There's some people that can pick it up very quickly, and a lot of it is based on experience and the number of races that you're able to do. So if you start your first year and you manage to do, 15, 20 races and you're successful, then getting an international license is easy. Some people, it could take forever, and some people never have that opportunity. There's also a number of different levels to an international license. So you've got a D license, a C license, a B license, an A license, and then basically what they call a super license, which is only for Formula One drivers. A D license is the easiest one to get. You basically have to show proficiency in a certain number of races. It's not ridiculously high. Getting up to a B or an A license definitely takes quite some doing, and that's what's required to do some of the bigger international races.
Very interesting. Your build is unique, I would guess, for a race car driver. And I want to know, how does the vehicle have to compromise for your size and stature?
It's a very nice way of saying I'm built like a football linebacker. Definitely, I don't have the build of a lot of drivers. I was actually a little bit closer when I was a cyclist. I'm 6'1", but back then I was 170 pounds, and now I'm a little over 200. So definitely a big jump. But as far as the cars go, there's really not too many things, especially now with a lot of sports car racing that we do. Our cars are based on street production cars. So, I drive the Porsche Cayman GT4 RS. There's Aston Martins, Mercedes. Those cars are all designed around what we would consider a standard human being, and with a wide variety of ranges able to accommodate. So really, honestly, I haven't had to struggle too much. Some of the historic cars I've gotten in have been a little bit more difficult. You're kind of shoehorning yourself in there. But I've been fortunate that I really have never not been able to get into a car due to my size.
6'1". Yeah, I was trying to decide how tall you were when we met, but I remembered that you were definitely tall, and yeah, football linebacker does kind of come to mind. With the Nashville Grand Prix right around the corner, I know last year you had great success as the GT America top finisher. Tell us about the nail-biting moments that put you on top of the podium.
Oh, they're all nail-biting moments when you're on a street course. I mean, that's the nature of street course racing, which for whatever reason, I just take to like a fish to water. Obviously, when you're on a standard road course, we'll have runoff, we'll have gravel traps. You've got wide exit curbing. So there's a lot more room to, let's say, make mistakes, or even small mistakes in judgment where you're placing the car don't usually have big consequences. With a street course, it's completely different. The whole entire circuit is lined with, massive concrete barriers that if you get it wrong, it's pretty much catastrophic, day done. So there's really never a point you get to relax where you can just kind of go, okay, I'm just, kind of cruising or whatever. Every corner has the potential to bite you very, very hard if you, even have a small lapse in concentration for a second.
So how do you get in the zone before a big race?
It's I think after doing it for as long as I've been doing it, and not only on the auto racing side, but also on the bike racing side, I've gotten used to it. Like, I've just gotten used to the mental preparation, the mental state that you have to get in. And I remember in cycling, and then when I first started racing cars, that took a while. I had to kind of basically detach myself from all of my sponsor commitments, and detach myself from the spectators and fans that, are always, wanting autographs and stuff, and then just kind of lock myself into a corner and just kind of focus and relax. And now it's gotten to the point now where I can pretty much get into the car, right before the race. I put the window net up, close the door, and give me 2-3 minutes, and I'm back focused again on what we need to do to win the race.
So speaking of racing in Nashville, I know you just competed at Pikes Peak, and I wanted to know about variables there compared to what you might see in Nashville.
That's completely different. Well, it's actually the same, because we joke around. I'd say that Nashville doesn't have any runoff. Pikes Peak basically has a ton of runoff. Unfortunately, it's all vertical. You make a mistake at Pikes Peak, and it's about 1,000 feet before you hit anything, and you have plenty of time to think about the mistake you just made. But it's also very tough because, sure, it's a motor race, but that's about where the similarities with Nashville is, that it's a completely different circuit. The elevation is the big thing. We started almost 10,000 feet and go to over 14,000 feet.
Wow.
It's 12 and a half miles. It's 156 corners. None of them are the same. You don't have reference points. There's no runoff. It's very, very high danger. So it's an incredibly difficult race, and it throws a lot of challenges at you. And then, unfortunately, we had the random challenge thrown in this year where we were heading down for qualifying at 2 a.m. in the morning, and managed to hit a deer at a high rate of speed on the highway. And that totaled our truck, and then obviously knocked us out for the day for being able to qualify, which then put us at the back of the field for the race day, which is always problematic. And on top of that, I had to clean off a lot of dead deer off the front of our truck. That obviously is not pleasant as well either. So I say too that it was a much worse day for the deer than it was for me.
Yeah, I really had never thought about wildlife on courses. It's a variable that is so unpredictable because it's totally an open course, right?
Yeah, I mean, and this was on the way down to the race, so that was a little different. But we do have problems with wildlife on course as well. You have mountain goats that populate Colorado, and then we also have marmots, which are like very large hamsters, and they love to sun themselves out in the middle of the road, and they actually can do quite a bit of damage to a car. So there's definitely a few variables that thrown in that you really don't see at any other racetrack.
My gut feeling is you're a bit of a thrill seeker.
Everybody says that, and I'm really not. I am not that guy. It's my mom always gives me a hard time about that, and she's like, how did I raise this thrill seeker? I'm like, honestly, I don't really ever see myself that way. For me, it's always I'm very, very focused. I don't consider myself an adrenaline junkie, but at the same time, I race cars for a living, so I guess I have to kind of put my hand up and cop to that and go, yeah, all right, I guess I am.
So circling back to Nashville for a minute, how important is it that Nashville hosts the Grand Prix?
Oh, I mean, it very much so. I mean, I think in general, being able to bring motorsports to the general population is something that is hugely important to our sport, especially as it now gets more and more popular with the success of series like Drive to Survive and Formula One. I think that being able to bring IndyCar and bring sports car racing to city centers where it's much more easily accessible to the general fan, it's probably the most important thing for our sport right now. And then Nashville, in and of itself as a host, is probably one of the best cities. I mean, it is Party Town, USA. I mean, it's such a great city. It's got so much culture. It's got so much amazing things to offer. And the fact that this circuit goes basically into the heart of Nashville, allowing fans to be able to watch the race and then turn around and go out and go watch live music or go to the bars or the restaurants, and that's only a block or two away. I honestly think it's definitely one of the greatest street circuits that we have in the country.
That's really neat to hear. You talked a lot about the city center and being in downtown Nashville, and when you were here a year or two ago, you visited the Davidson Juvenile Justice Center. And I just wanted you to tell us a little bit about that visit and why it was important to make that stop.
No, and it's the second year I've done that. I was asked to do it the first year, and I didn't realize, first of all, I didn't realize the proximity of the Justice Center to the actual course. It actually sits on the last corner of the course. And then when I realized that, it all of a sudden took on a new level of priority. I mean, the fact that, these kids would be able to only experience the race from behind the walls of the Justice Center, and I didn't want that to be their experience with racing is it's inaccessible. Sorry, it's on the other side of the wall, and you'll never be able to see it or experience or have any sort of interaction with it. So I made sure the first year to go in and speak with the kids. And you're never sure what to expect. I mean, with kids in general, whether they're going to be accepting of just you and the sport and everything else and what you're bringing to them. And I was amazed that I found like the most receptive group, the most interested group of kids in what we were doing that I'd actually come across. And so that was really special to me that I was able to kind of reach out to those guys and basically bring something different. And then the fact that we were able to go in and win 2 races last year, and it's something that they were able to watch streaming, over the internet, watching those wins and having me be the one that had gone in and talked to them, something special for them. And it was something special for me. And it's definitely something that I'll be looking forward to coming back this year and doing the same thing again.
Oh, that's so wonderful. What should non-racing folks know about the sport of racing? And I'd love for you to walk us through what you might be doing before a race such as Nashville.
There's a couple things. Obviously, first, let's talk about the race itself in terms of what it is that we do. So our series, or what we race, is called sports cars. And sports cars, for the most part, are manufacturer-built cars that are very, very similar to their street counterparts. There's 2 classes that run in our series, and the series is called SRO. And we run in the GT America class, which basically is a GT3 and GT4 car. So there's 2 separate divisions that run under this banner. They're all street car based to a degree. The GT3s are a little less street car based. They still have the same chassis and engine, but they have far more aerodynamics, and they're far more race car oriented in terms of the components that are on the car. The GT4 class is as stock street as you can get and still have a race car. There are some upgrades that the manufacturers do. There's some braking upgrades that they have. There may be a little bit of suspension upgrades, but I would say 90% of the car that we run is a car that you could go to the dealer on Monday and buy. And that's kind of the old adage in motorsports. It's the win on Sunday, sell on Monday. So when we go out and can win in our Porsche, hopefully that's the customers, the consumers out there recognize that how great a brand that Porsche is, and that's the car that they want to go out and buy, and they'll show up in their dealer on Monday morning and go buy one. So it does make it interesting if the race stays green flag the whole entire time, meaning there is no cautions that bunch the field back up. You'll end up seeing the GT3 cars lap the GT4 cars at some point. And then there's a whole dimension of multi-class racing where the GT3 and GT4 cars almost have to cooperate in order to share the same space on the track. So that makes things very, very interesting later on in the race if it manages to stay green the whole entire time, which I think we've been fairly fortunate with and not had too many cautions. So knock on wood that continues. The rest of the race weekend, we load into the paddock on the Thursday, and then that allows the team to prepare the car. So we'll do some setup on the car, we'll make some suspension changes, and get the car all prepped and ready to go out for practice on Friday. And then on Friday we have 2 practice sessions. I believe we're just before lunch, and then sometime around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we'll go out again for our 2 practice sessions. And those are basically allows the driver to see the course. Obviously guys like me who have done it since the beginning, it's more of, hey, look, I've been here before. Let me just kind of remember the small details. And then for the guys who are new, it's a whole new ball game, and they really got to take the 2 sessions to get up to speed. And then from there on the Saturday, I believe it's afternoon, we have qualifying. And that qualifying will set the grid for race 1. And then race 1 we have on Saturday night. And that's honestly, for me, it's the most awesome race. It's the race that starts in, basically at dusk and then goes all the way through into twilight, into a bit of darkness. And it's just a great shift of the mood and the energy of the race as opposed to the standard race, which we normally do, which is usually in the middle of the day. And then we do that. The fastest lap from race 1 will set the grid for race 2, which is on Sunday. And then we race, I think, later in the day this year. Normally it's before the IndyCar race, and I think this year we're doing it after the IndyCar race. And then that completes the weekend. For the fan who might want to come, the other thing to know is that even though I want to promote SRO and the racing that we're doing, is that there is plenty of other racing throughout the day with IndyCar, with Trans Am, and then SRO was also bringing the Toyota GR86 Cup race as well, which are all equally prepared Toyota 86s. That'll round out the weekend. So it's definitely a full day for any fan that wants to attend.
That's wonderful. It's neat to hear you kind of lay out the calendar, the time grid, and all the things that take place. I always wondered about the light difference during that one race, because last year I witnessed part of that and I was like, that has to be so weird to begin when it's light out and then as the light changes into dusk to be racing. I'm sure it must be fascinating, but there are a lot of variables.
Yeah, and it is tough to adapt to. And in fact, I think we are starting, I think we're due to start a half an hour later this year. And then the GR86 Cup is going off after us. And the interesting thing and the problem is that the stock headlights that we run on the car aren't powerful enough to see far enough ahead on a circuit like that. So we've actually been working with one of my main partners, Hella Pagid. Hella is a lighting company that supplies lights for a lot of the manufacturers, and they also have some very, very powerful LED aftermarket lights. And we're working with them right now to hopefully supply lights to the rest of the grid so that they have a bit more powerful lights so that we can run later into the night. But it's very, very difficult as you get into the night. It's impossible to see where your braking markers are and where the upcoming corners are. And I think we're at 145 miles an hour at the end of the bridge coming back into the stadium area. And at that speed, you need to be able to see several hundred yards ahead, and the stock lights just can't keep up with that.
Wow, that's really interesting. So let's talk a little bit about being a managing partner of 3R Performance and then also a team member of Rotec Racing. How does that all fit together?
Well, actually, it's oddly enough, I am the owner of Rotec Racing as well. So it's 3 full-time jobs. The Rotec Racing was founded way back in 2012 when my partner and I, Roland Pritzker, founded that to basically go over to Europe and bring American drivers over there. So we bought a facility at the Nürburgring and started Rotec Racing. And Rotec Racing has had massive success over the years. We've won tons of races, especially at the Nürburgring. We were the first American team to take part in the British Touring Car Championship full-time. We've had F1 drivers drive for us. We've had multiple-time world champions drive for us. So the team was a great success. And then we decided to do some more stuff in the U.S. So we basically brought Rotec Racing here to the U.S. And then in doing that, we were looking for a base, and I got talking to the team that I actually turned pro for years and years and years ago, 3R Racing. And long story short, those conversations led to me buying a controlling interest in the company. And basically we founded a whole new company called 3R Performance. So you look at those two things and you go, okay, well, it's, you own a racing performance shop and you own a racing team. And, those two things are very similar. It should be pretty easy to run everything. And it's not, you couldn't find two more dissimilar things to go do. And so I've managed to find myself in 3 full-time jobs. I'm driving the race car, managing Rotec Racing, and also 3R Performance. So I'm a busy guy right now. It's been great. And I'm happy to do it. I've kind of been saying I'm closer to the end of my driving career than I am to the beginning. And so I have to look at what the next chapter is, and what am I going to do for down the road? And I've got so many great memories and so much great experience coming out of motorsports that, even if I stop driving, I don't want to be out of the industry. So it'll be great. I'll be able to hopefully keep my fingers in it in both with Rotec Racing and 3R Performance. And they're both great teams and great shops and with some amazing individuals. And it'll be a great next chapter.
Well, and I love to hear you talking about next chapters because all of us, it's important to have something to do after you retire from whatever your full-time day gig is or whatever. And I see a lot of people who do that and then they end up going back into some sort of role in the business world because they're used to contributing and being involved. And I just feel like most people really do like to be involved and have a sense of purpose. And you're planning that strategy very well, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's great. I've always said, everybody grows up, you want to be like an astronaut or a firefighter or a race car driver. And, how many people actually get to be those things? And so I consider myself incredibly fortunate that I managed to find my way into this industry. And I want to keep doing it as long as I can.
So I want to touch back on cycling just a bit. Tell us a little bit about how cycling fits into your routine and training, and also about your connections with Lance Armstrong, Greg LeMond, and George Hincapie.
Yeah. It was one of those things. I loved sports when I was a kid, and I played lacrosse, I played hockey, I played football, everything. But for whatever reason, cycling was the thing that just captured my imagination as a kid. So growing up in New York, I managed to get in with my next door neighbor just down the road from me, a guy named Bill Monahan. I randomly ran into him when he was riding, and I was still a kid on I don't even remember what I had, but it was some cheap dime store bike that I was riding, and I saw him and I caught up to him and I said, hey, this whole thing with cycling is super interesting. And for whatever reason, he just took to me, and he and I became best friends, and he dragged me into the whole cycling world. And I grew up racing with George Hincapie, who was Lance Armstrong's lieutenant. His brother, Rich Hincapie, actually who was more my age, and George was a few years younger than us, but you already could tell at a very young age his ability far exceeded, well, definitely mine and pretty much everybody else on the East Coast at that time. So it was no surprise to see him with the great success over in Europe. And I got to race obviously against him and Lance Armstrong when they came back over to race in the U.S. And then, Greg LeMond has been kind of one of the idols growing up, as an American cyclist racing over in Europe. And then it was also at the start of my motorsport career as well. It was very interesting because Greg LeMond, the guys, from 7-Eleven, you had Davis Finney and Andy Hampston and Ron Kiefel, all of those guys who are legends in the cycling world. That kind of gave me the inspiration to go over to Europe and race cars because looking at those guys, there weren't a lot of Americans that were racing over there at the time. You had Jacques Boyer, I think, that came over in the late 80s, and then that was really about it. So when it was time for me in my motorsport career, I'd always been a huge fan of British touring car. So to have that inspiration, but also the pathway that these guys took, they weren't afraid to go over to Europe and be Americans in Europe. And so when the opportunity came for me to be able to start Rotec Racing over there and then also going and doing British touring car, I was like, oh, well, hey, look, those guys from 7-Eleven, those guys all did it. So there's no reason that I shouldn't be able to do the same thing. And so it was almost this pathway to being able to do some pretty cool things for the rest of my career.
You know what I love about that entire story is hearing you maybe paint a picture for other young men or women that dreams really can come true, and the role that mentors play too.
It's massive. And I think that's, one of the things, my dad was a pioneer in the business world for a number of years. He was the CEO of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, which when he got that job, he was the first black CEO of a major corporation in the U.S. history. And, for him, he was the same way, to be able to basically open that door for other people. His thing to me was always that he didn't mind being the first person through the door, but he also wanted to make sure that he wasn't the last person through that door. And so for me, it's the same thing. And yeah, for me, I'm able to work with some incredible people across, multiple sports. And, those guys were mentors to me. And I want to make sure that I can continue my dad's legacy that way and make sure that, I've had these amazing experiences. And so I want to make sure that I can keep that door open using my experiences to show other kids that, hey, look, here's the doorway, here's the pathway. This is how you go do it. I've done it. You can go online and Google everything that I've done and use that as a pathway. And hopefully that we're able to do that. And one of the things, and this is, I've always got to say thank you to Greg Gill and everybody at SRO, because that was one of the reasons I came back to racing in the US, was because Greg said, look, we need someone like you in the paddock because you understand how important it is to be that mentor, to be that guy who opens the door. And Greg always said, he's like, I want you to open the door to our series and make our series the series that allows all of these people to understand how much motorsport has to offer. And that to me is always kind of, I've really, hit home with all of that. And it's hugely important for me to be able to be that conduit for a lot of people. It gives me the motivation, it gives me the motivation to keep going so that I can keep the door open for as many kids as I can that are following after me.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So your career highlights and your accolades are plentiful. What do you consider your greatest achievement to date?
That's a tough one. Pikes Peak for me was always this unachievable thing. And to be able to show up as a rookie the first year and break the front wheel drive record, that was massively special. To go into the British Touring Car Championships and be the first American since Dan Gurney to compete in the series and to score points in the series, that's amazingly special. And then the Nürburgring was this complete unobtainium thing. That was something that Europeans did, and it was the holy grail that I would never ever ever be able to see or to experience. And then to be able to live there for years, and I remember one of my first 24-hour races there. They go off in 3 waves, and I was able to lead the field onto the main circuit, the Nordschleife, in front of 300,000 fans, and I have a video of that whole entire lap, and it's this beautiful thing. There's no one ahead of you, there's no one behind you, and you just got this lap going on, and you just see hundreds of thousands of fans pressed up against the fence, and you just go, that doesn't happen. And those are all very, very special memories. So I couldn't really say that there's any one. It's just, that's the thing about motorsports, is that it's always creating these great memories and these great things that I'll be able to take with me the rest of my life.
They're very cool, very nice memories. I've got a few questions that I'm going to call it a speed round of questions just for you. Is there something yet that you would like to accomplish that would be the pinnacle of your career?
Le Mans.
How did your family respond when you decided to pursue racing?
I think they all kind of shrugged their shoulders and went, that's just Rob. That's just what he was going to do. My dad has always said, this is the other great thing that my dad's given me, is he's like, look, if you give 100% and you fail, he's like, I've got your back. But the minute you give 99%, you're on your own. So when I went into motorsports, that was his thing to me, is that if you're going to do it 100%. And hopefully I've done that, and he's been proud of what we've been able to accomplish.
Parents and mentors play such an important role. What do race car drivers really think when a driver on or off the track is in their way?
I don't think I can actually say that. But it's really funny because I actually, when I first started racing, I used to drive a lot of sports cars and stuff. And I got a few speeding tickets back then. I have now since decided that the best thing for me to do is to drive a very slow, very sedate SUV. So everybody's always disappointed because they'll always ask me what my street car is. And they're like, you drive a base Porsche Cayenne? That's not the car that we expected to hear. But it has saved me from many a speeding ticket. So it's very nondescript, and it gets me from point A to point B very well. And I don't feel the need to drive past everybody as much as I used to.
That's called maturity too, maybe.
It's just getting old.
What do folks not know about in-car audio and what goes on behind the scenes during a race?
It's interesting because there is a lot of information that goes back and forth between the driver and my engineer. If you look at the lap times, there'll be 7 or 8 or 9 cars within the same second. Even if I'm, in the lead of qualifying, with 2 or 3 minutes to go, if I'm only in the lead by 1/10 of a second, there's just too many variables. And so we have to keep pushing. We have to look for that next lap time. And those are things that my engineer needs to convey to me, is that, here's where you are, but here are the other 4 cars behind you. It looks like they're going faster. You need to go faster. And so there's a lot of communication back and forth that way. The thing that people will laugh at is that when the racing gets close, it does get a little heated. And there'll be times where I'll just be on the radio to my engineer, just cursing up a storm. and he, we had this talk a week or two ago, and he's like, when you start doing that, he's like, I just turn the radio down for a minute or two. So that, it's competition, and there's a lot of, all these cars are very similar. Our pace is always very similar. And so when things get heated and get tough, it's interesting, the stuff that goes on in the background, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a tiny bit about camaraderie. Camaraderie is certainly important in life, but will you share a bit about the philosophy of camaraderie both on and off the track, especially with the crew and your team?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. The easy one is the crew and the team. And when we're not a crew and a team, we're a family. We're together for at least a year. But if you look at our team, the guys who are with us, most of them have been with us for 2 or 3 years. And, when Rotec was racing over in Europe, our crew from over in Europe, we were all connected on Facebook, and we're always cheering each other on for all of our successes. And so it's definitely way more of a family than it is a team. You're in the trenches every single week, and it just creates a bond that far outstrips, the normal bonds of regular friendship. One of the amazing things, though, is circling back to Pikes Peak. That's a thing unlike any other. When we're doing standard sports car racing, you're racing against other teams and other individuals. There's a natural animosity to them because they're the guys that you have to beat. And so there has to be this level of animosity or conflict or whatever. But when you go do Pikes Peak, the very interesting thing is that we're not racing each other. We're racing the mountain. That becomes our adversary. That becomes the thing that we are trying to conquer. And because of the unique challenge and the potential for serious injury or worse, the camaraderie between the drivers at Pikes Peak is by far the deepest camaraderie you can have in sports. If any driver has an issue at Pikes Peak, if they have a mechanical or like literally everybody in the paddock, rallies around and what can we do to help? And here's my mechanic, here's my engineer. We're fine for right now. How do we help you out? I can't tell you when we hit the deer, every team on the planet. Okay, well, let's see if we can get you a truck. Let's see, do you need a trailer? Do you need anything else? Is the car damaged? Do you need tools? Do you need equipment? It's just like this outpouring of support, which you just don't get in any other form of motorsport, but definitely in sports in general. And so you do have this whole thing where you're battling against the mountain, and that just creates that bond that's just very, very amazing and incredibly special.
So one other thing that I've read about you, and I want to talk just a tiny bit about this, is you have a unique perspective on age and mental acuity. How does this impact not only your life on the racetrack, but also when you're competing with people who might be half your age?
It's a stupid saying, but age is just a number. I honestly don't feel my age. And to me, it's not this like I'm trying to fight against time. I just don't care. It's just, I can do what I can do. And I don't see that that's any reason to put me in any sort of particular bin as, okay, well, he's a guy who's past his prime or whatever. I'm clearly still capable of winning races. And as long as I'm able to do that, I still have the drive and the passion. And for me, I haven't allowed myself to kind of fall into that pit of, once you've passed this certain age, then you're expected to be this or not be this or not be able to accomplish these things. I did an interview probably at the start of my career that's kind of just stuck with me. And I said a quote that basically boundaries are for other people. The person who was interviewing me was talking more about my race in the sport that didn't reflect a lot of people like me. But I said, boundaries are for other people. It doesn't apply to me. Like, if you don't think you can do something, then don't do it. And that's fine. And no one's going to judge you for it. I'll know when I'm not capable of something. That's the great thing about racing. It is a meritocracy. At the end of the day, you're either on pole or you're not. You're either winning races or you're not. And at that point in time, when I can't win races anymore, then I'll know that it's time to stop and go do something else. So that's just kind of how I view things. And there's no age to it. If I'm, I always look at Paul Newman. Paul Newman, I think, was 78 when he did his last Daytona 24-hour race. And, I always go, that's amazing. If I can operate the remote control to my TV at 78 without screwing it up, I'll be really happy. So for me, that's the same thing. It's just like, I think Paul Newman went into the race going, I can still drive, and, he still could. And those are the things that hopefully I'll be able to accomplish in the next 20 years of my life.
Mm-hmm. So I've got two more questions that we ask all of our guests. One is, what is one piece of advice that you might have gotten from your parents or an older adult that at the time they shared it with you, you thought, this is really silly, but now it rings true in your everyday life?
I think all advice that I got from my parents, I thought was silly. I was definitely that, what are you talking about? It is really funny because it does come full circle. And I don't think you have perspective on things until you get to a point where you either have your own kids or you're kind of an age that you're overseeing or mentoring a bunch of different people. The thing that I would say, though, is it's fine that you think whatever your parents are saying is silly or whatever. Don't forget it. It will come back around. And, like I've said before, the things that my dad gave to me, I didn't understand at the time, telling me that if I give 100%, he's behind me. If I give 99, I didn't get that. What does that mean? And then you realize that, what it means is that my dad gave me the ability to fail, which I think is probably one of the greatest things that you can give somebody, because that meant that as long as I literally put my heart and soul into everything that I did, that I had his backing. And so I was able to do all of these different things. I was able to become a professional cyclist. I was able to become a professional race car driver and race team owner and media personality and all these other things, because I knew if I gave 100% that I always had my parents' backing. And I didn't forget that. It just took me a long time to realize what that was and how important and how special that was.
Well, you'll have to share this podcast with them, because I think you've really underscored a lot of that in this interview. One more question. What is it that you do to squeeze the day?
Everything. It literally is everything that I do. Like I said, my dad said 100%. So it is literally squeezing every single minute out of the day. And the most important thing to remember out of that is you still, regardless of all of these things that I'm doing with the team and the shop and driving and all of these things, the most important thing is family to me. And my wife is the most important thing. And I can't just go, I'm squeezing the day to get everything out of it in terms of all these other things I'm doing. The most important thing is family. So to make sure that I've got plenty of time for her and that she is the number one thing in my life, that's the most important thing for me to get out of the day.
That's beautiful. She paid me to ask that question.
I'm sure. I have no doubt that she did.
Thank you so much, Robb, for joining us today. Your story is inspiring and reinforces that challenges can become opportunities. We learn so much from one another, and certainly from the experiences of those in their second chapter of life. I look forward to seeing what happens in your third. And now we challenge everyone listening to go squeeze the day. Squeeze the Day is made possible through listeners like you. If you enjoy this podcast, please help us continue to share inspiring stories of older adults and visit 50forward.org to make a contribution. That's FIFTYFORWARD.org. Let's support, champion, and enhance the lives of older adults together.